Mary didn't answer for a moment. Then she said, "Only you." "What do you mean, only me?" She looked at him sadly. His head was bald now. He was beginning to look like an old man. Once, she had wanted to marry him. Now, she was pleased that he hadn't asked her. "Oh, I just meant your leg, of course." John still had a painful red place on his leg, and sometimes he walked badly because of it. But that wasn't what Mary meant. John smiled. "My leg's nearly better. I'd almost forgotten about it. But Mary, before you go, I wonder if you could help me. It's a family matter." "I see. Well, how can I help? I don't know your children very well, you know." "No, of course not. But you're a woman and, well, it's sometimes difficult for me, as a father on my own. Christine's a young woman now, and she hasn't got a mother to discuss things with. I don't always know what to say." "No." Mary looked at him sadly. She often wondered why he didn't ask her to his house more often. She liked him and his children, and she thought he liked her. "How old is Christine now?" 18, and she wants to get married." "Already? She's rather young, isn't she?" John looked unhappy. "Well, that's what I say. But she gets so angry with me, Mary, really angry." "Who's the young man?" "He's called Simon MacDonald. He's a journalist. He works for the local newspaper. He's a nice young man, I suppose. But every time I speak to him, we argue. And then Christine always agrees with him, and I get angry with her, too. I don't want to, Mary, but I do. I feel I'm losing her, you see." "What do you argue about?" "Oh, I don't know. Stupid things, really. He belongs to one of these environmental groups. Green World, I think. And he's always talking about it. He thinks only young people are right, and everyone over 25 is always wrong." Mary looked at John thoughtfully. "Well, what do you want me to do, John? I'm not a mother, and I've never been married." "No, but you could talk to Christine, perhaps. If you came to our house for Sunday lunch." So Mary went to John's house. Simon was there too. They had a meal and talked about horses and sailing. Everyone was polite, and there were no arguments. Later, Mary went with Christine to look at her horse, and Simon stayed with John. In the field, Mary began to talk about Simon. "He's a fine young man, Christine. He's very clever and kind. He makes me think of your father." "My father? He's nothing like my father. And Dad hates him." "I'm sure he doesn't." "He does. He says he's too old for me, and I mustn't see him. He thinks I'm still a little girl, Mary. But I'm 18. I want to get married. Tell me more about Simon." And so, for a long time, Mary stood in the quiet, lonely field. She helped Christine give food to her horse, and listened to her talk about Simon. Simon, Christine said, was kind, intelligent, very hard-working. He liked sailing and riding, and he wanted to make the world a cleaner, better place. He made her feel important, like an adult, not a child anymore. She had met his parents, and they liked her a lot. It was only her father. "So, what should I do, Mary?" Christine asked. Mary put her hand on the horse's neck. "I'm not sure," she said. "I think you should marry him. But you don't want to make your father angry, do you? That's not the best way to start your life with Simon." "No, but I will if I have to." "Would you like me to talk to him? Perhaps he'll listen to me." "It's difficult for him. You're his only daughter, and he's probably very worried about it." "Oh, would you, Mary, please? I want Dad to like Simon, really, but he's always nasty to him." "I'll do my best, my dear, but I don't know if it'll work." Mary did try, very hard, before she moved to Scotland for her new job. She spoke to John on the phone, and sometimes they had a cup of coffee together in town. She was surprised how carefully John listened to her, and how grateful he seemed for her help. He's really a very lonely man, she thought. It must be hard for him with 2 children and no wife. He used to talk to his children a lot, but he doesn't now. At last, John agreed to the marriage. Mary was invited to a special supper because of the good news. Christine was very happy. She kissed Mary when she arrived, and gave her a small, secret present to thank her. It was a pair of pretty earrings. At the meal, John seemed a little nervous, but happy too. He tried hard to smile, and thanked Mary, although he didn't think of giving her a present. He watched Christine all through the meal. He seemed to be afraid that he would never see her again, and he was very happy when she smiled at him. Then Simon stood up to say something. "Mr. Duncan," he said, "I'll always remember this night. I know how much you love your daughter, and believe me, sir, I love her too. You've been worried about me because you want her to have the best husband possible, and I can't promise anything, but I'm going to try to be that man. You're a rich man, Mr. Duncan, and of course Christine and I won't have a lot of money at first, but I hope we'll manage." He smiled at Christine. "And yesterday, Mr. Duncan, I spoke to my employer, and he's going to pay me a little more than before." John looked surprised. "Oh, really? Why is that?" "Well, because he's given me a new job. He's asked me to write about the environment for our newspaper. I have to write a full-page article every week on the environment. And this is the first one. Look here." He pulled a page of newspaper out of his pocket and held it up in front of them. There were pictures of water, sandbanks, and some seals. The headline read, "Seals at Rivermouth have strange disease. 4 baby seals found dead." 8. The wedding day. The disease among the seals got worse. 3 more baby seals died, and 1 was born without a tail. Scientists came from London to look at them, and there were long articles in the newspapers, but no one was sure what the reasons were. Some people said that it was a disease that was always in the water. Some people said the seals were eating diseased fish, and some people said that it was the paint factory near the river. There was a sewage works near the river too, The sewage from another small town came into it. One day, in the factory, John Duncan found two young chemists testing samples of water from the river. The water came from 2 kilometers upstream near the sewage works. "Why are you doing that?" he asked, surprised. "It's a special experiment," one of them answered. "David Wilson asked us to do it himself. Didn't he tell you so?" John didn't answer. He watched them quietly for several minutes. "What are the results?" he asked. "They're bad, sir," said the young man. But he didn't look worried. He looked pleased, proud of himself. "That sewage works is putting a lot of nasty things into the river, you know. I think the newspapers will be very interested." "The newspapers?" John asked. The young man smiled. "Yes, Mr. Duncan, of course. Our company cares about the environment, doesn't it? That's why we're doing this. We want to help those poor seals if we can." As John walked away, he listened for the sound of quiet laughter behind him. But he heard nothing. Perhaps the young man really believed what he said. Christine and Simon were married on a fine day in June. When they came back from the church, they had a party in the garden at John's house. Everyone seemed very happy. John liked Simon's parents and talked to them a lot. "You're very lucky, Mr. Duncan," Simon's father said. "You have a beautiful house with a lovely river at the end of the garden." "I haven't always been lucky," John answered. "People used to say I was a very unlucky man." He stood still, thinking. He remembered how unhappy he had been in the little flat in the middle of the town. He had been unemployed then, with no money to buy good things for his children. But he had always been able to talk to them. Now he was a rich man, success, and his children didn't want to talk to him. He smiled at Mr. and Mrs. MacDonald. "Yes," he said, "I'm a very lucky man. I have Simon for my son-in-law. I'm very pleased for my daughter." Mrs. MacDonald was pleased. "We're very pleased to have Christine for our daughter-in-law too," she said. "And I'm sure Simon will help you with this river, Mr. Duncan. I understand there's a disease in it, which is making the seals ill. Simon told me he's going to work very hard to find the reason for that and clean up the river. I'm sure you're pleased about that, Mr. Duncan." "Yes, of course." John had seen Simon's article in the newspaper last night about the diseases that came from the sewage works. David Wilson had shown it to him. John didn't want to talk about it. He saw his daughter laughing with Simon, Andrew, and some friends. He had never seen her look so happy. He remembered his own wedding, and the hopes he and Rachel had had. "Let me get you another drink, Mrs. MacDonald," he said. "We must drink to our children's future, and wish them luck." At the bar in the house he met Mary. She came back to the town sometimes, and twice he had visited her in Scotland. "This day's been a great success, John," she said. "You must be a happy man." He touched her arm thoughtfully. "I'd like to be, Mary," he said. "I've tried, you know."